Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 18th November 2022, and the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start the discussion. This article on page number 14 reads that the Election Commission may be honest but can have definite political leanings, and this is the observation of one of the judges of the Supreme Court. Now, we are aware that the Election Commission of India was envisaged as an independent constitutional body to conduct free and fair elections in India. However, the provisions related to the independence of the Election Commission of India have come into question because they are not at par with the other constitutional bodies like the Supreme Court judges or the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. So let us first try and understand the various articles related to the independence of the Election Commission of India, and also what are the issues therein and what are the proposed amendments in various electoral reforms that have been proposed till now. Now, the article which establishes the Election Commission of India is the Article 324 of the Indian Constitution, and it provides for various clauses related to the appointment and removal of the Chief Election Commissioner of India. So in this regard, the Article 324 reads that the Election Commission of India is a permanent independent constitutional body which is vested with the powers of superintendence, direction and control of the preparation of electoral rolls for and conduct of all parliamentary, state elections and elections to the office of the President and Vice President in accordance with this Article 324 of the Indian Constitution. Now, regarding the appointment of the election commissioners, the clause 2 of the Article 324 reads that the Election Commission shall be a multi-member body, because this article provides that the Election Commission shall consist of Chief Election Commissioner and such number of other election commissioners, if any, as the President may from time to time appoint. And the appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner and the election commissioners shall be subject to the provisions of any law made in that behalf by the Parliament. Now, regarding the removal of the Chief Election Commissioner, the Article 324(5) reads that the removal of the Chief Election Commissioner from the office shall be like manner and on the like grounds as the judge of the Supreme Court. So the grounds and the manner of removal of the Chief Election Commissioner of India is similar to the grounds and the manner of the removal of the judges of the Supreme Court. In this regard, this article also specifies that any other election commissioner or regional commissioner shall not be removed from the office except on the recommendations of the Chief Election Commissioner. Now, in this regard, although the Election Commission has been established as an independent institution, there are certain issues in its functioning, and also there are certain issues with these constitutional provisions related to the Election Commission of India, and hence various reforms have been proposed and amendments have been proposed in this regard. So let us look at these reforms and the amendments that have been proposed by various bodies in this context. Now, first amendment that is required to ensure the independence of the Election Commission of India is regarding the removal of the election commissioners. So in this regard, we have just learned that the removal of the Chief Election Commissioner shall be in the manner and the grounds as the judge of the Supreme Court. However, regarding the removal of the election commissioners other than the Chief Election Commissioner, it shall not be removed from office except on the recommendations of the Chief Election Commissioner. And this is an ambiguous clause in the Article 324(5). And that is why the Constitution merely says that the election commissioners cannot be removed from the office except on the recommendation of the Chief Election Commissioner. In this regard, an amendment has been proposed which aims at providing the same protection and safeguard in the matter of removability of the election commissioners as is available to the Chief Election Commissioner. And this is because the Election Commission was envisaged as a multi-member body. And that is why if the conditions for the removal of Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners is different, it will compromise the independence of the institution and will also make the other election commissioners subordinate to the Chief Election Commissioner. And that is why this amendment has been proposed in the Election Commission of India and the removal of the election commissioners. Second issue here is related to the expenditure of the Election Commission of India. Now, present status is that the administrative expenditure of the Election Commission is a voted expenditure. Voted expenditure means the Parliament can vote on this expenditure. Now, when Parliament votes, it can alter the amount that is allocated to the Election Commission of India related to that. However, if you look at the other independent constitutional bodies, the expenditure of these independent constitutional bodies like the Supreme Court, the Comptroller and Auditor General as well as the UPSC, all are charged expenditure and are non-votable in nature. And that is why a proposed amendment is that the salaries, allowances and the pension payable to the Chief Election Commissioner and the other election commissioners, as well as the administrative expenses, which includes the salaries, allowances, and the pension of the staff of the Election Commission, shall be charged expenditure upon the Consolidated Fund of India, so that it cannot be put to vote or it can be non-votable in nature. So this is again second proposal for making Election Commission of India as an independent institution, because if the Election Commission of India will be dependent upon the Parliament and the Executive for its funding also, it will compromise its independence. Third issue in this regard is related to the independent secretariat for the commission, that is the Election Commission of India. Now presently the Election Commission of India has a separate secretariat of its own. However, the issue here is that the officers at the higher level, such as the level of Deputy Election Commissioner, are normally appointed on a tenure basis on deputation from the National Civil Services, and that is an issue. And that is why the Commission has proposed that it should have an independent secretariat along the lines of Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha and the registries of the Supreme Court as well as High Court. An independent secretariat will enable the Commission to choose and appoint the officials considered suitable by the Commission without any interference from the Executive. So basically, all these amendments are aimed at making the Election Commission of India more and more independent and free from interference of the Executive. And that is how the Election Commission of India will be able to perform its duties properly of conducting free and fair elections in our democracy. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 8 is related to the electoral bond scheme that was introduced few years back related to political party funding. Now this was done in order to bring about transparency as well as accountability in the form of electoral funding. However, the way in which it has played out has led to various challenges in the Supreme Court against this electoral bonding scheme, because it favors a few and it creates inequality in terms of political funding. In this context, political funding and the electoral bond scheme becomes very important for us from the mains examination perspective. In this line, let us first try and understand what is the importance of electoral funding and also how the electoral bond scheme is playing out. And after that, we'll try to understand the basics of the electoral bond scheme and also what are the issues in the present manner in which this scheme is functioning. Now, if you look at the importance of political party funding, we all are aware that funding is very important for the functioning of the political parties. However, the manner in which the political party funding is taking place highlights the efficacy of the institutional safeguards also. We all are aware that the Election Commission of India plays a very crucial role in maintaining the sanctity of the electoral system in India. In this regard, the manner in which the electoral bond scheme is functioning has raised questions about efficacy of the Election Commission of India also, because it has kept Election Commission of India in dark. And the ECI has raised questions regarding the electoral bond schemes in the Supreme Court also. Further, centralized political party funding determines if the power in the party is distributed or captured by few elites. In this line, the way in which electoral bond scheme is functioning, it is highlighted that the political party funding is becoming more and more centralized. It is not decentralized in nature, that is, the regional members of the political party are not having a very important role in the political party funding. And that is why it is highlighted that the centralized political party funding determines if the power in the party is distributed or is captured by few elites. Because if the political party funding is centralized, the power in the political parties is bound to be captured by a few elites. Further, it corrodes the ideological competition among the political parties, because there are only few corporates who are funding the political parties, which are having the major chunk in the funding of these political parties. And as such, the parties focus more on taking funds from these corporates rather than focusing on the ideological basis which binds the people together or who want to align with the ideology of the political party. And that is why it has been highlighted that it corrodes the ideological competition amongst the political parties. In this line, if you look at the present status of electoral funding through the electoral bond schemes in India, it is being highlighted that it provides advantage to the ruling party. If you look at the recent revelation of the ADR, which is an NGO which talks about the political party funding, it highlights that the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party in 2019-20 got over 75% of the total electoral bonds that were sold. Further, the manner in which the electoral bond scheme is functioning, it is centralizing the political party funding in India. And this is leading to entrenching of the leverage of the national leadership over the state as well as the local units. And this is a cause of concern for the democracy in India, because if the power is centralized and it is not distributed amongst the population or people, it becomes a problematic issue. And out of the total 5,851 crore of the electoral bonds that were sold in 2018 and 19, 80% of these bonds were redeemed in Delhi, which clearly highlights the centralized nature of political party funding that is happening because of the introduction of the electoral bond scheme. And this makes us understand how was this electoral bond scheme first introduced in the first place, and also what were the changes that were brought about, and also what are the issues in the functioning of the electoral bond scheme, and what is the admission of the Election Commission of India in the Supreme Court in this regard. Now this matter is sub judice, that is, the Supreme Court is considering various petitions that have been filed against the electoral bond scheme, and only once the judgment is out, we will be in a condition to understand the implications of such a judgment related to electoral bond scheme, or if there will be any change in the future. So now first let's understand what is an electoral bond and how was this scheme introduced. So regarding this, you should note that the Department of Economic Affairs under the Ministry of Finance had promulgated the electoral bond scheme in 2018, and it was notified under the section 31(3) of the Reserve Bank of India Act. So these can be a few important aspects for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Second, let's look at what is an electoral bond. So regarding this, you should note that it is a bond issued in the nature of promissory note, which shall be bearer banking instrument, which means that anybody who holds this promissory note or the electoral bond can get it encashed. And this bond shall not carry the name of the buyer or the payee, which means that the person or company which is giving the political funding, its name will not be disclosed. And this causes lack of transparency, and which is the main issue in the case which is going on in the Supreme Court. Further, you should note that these electoral bonds do not provide any interest. Normally, we note that in other kind of bonds, interest is provided by the person or the company which is trying to raise the fund through the bonds. However, in this case, no interest will be provided. However, these electoral bonds will be tax deductible, which means that tax exemptions will be provided to the people who are funding the political parties through the electoral bonds. Now, for the introduction of electoral bonds in India, changes were made in the following acts. And these changes were done in the Finance Act, which is presented with the budget in the year 2016, as well as in the Finance Act of 2017. In the Finance Act of 2016, the changes were made in the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 2010. And further, changes were also made in the Income Tax Act of 1961, the Representation of People Act 1951, the Companies Act of 2013, and the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934. So you should keep this aspect in mind that the changes were made in the following acts for the introduction of electoral bonds. And this can be a potential question for your preliminary examination. Now let us look at the impact of introduction of electoral bonds and what are the associated issues with these electoral bonds in India. Now, before the introduction of electoral bonds, donations to the political parties could be done in cash below the amount of rupees 20,000. However, after the introduction of electoral bonds, this amount was reduced only to 2,000. And now all the donations above rupees 2,000 cannot be done in cash, and they have to be done through the electoral bonds. Now previously, the political parties had to declare donations in excess of rupees 2,000 received from any person or company. So these political parties had to declare the donations which were in excess of rupees 20,000 before the introduction of electoral bonds. Also, the political parties were supposed to maintain the records of contributions which were made in excess of rupees 20,000 with the names and addresses of all the donors. However, after the introduction of electoral bonds through the Finance Act of 2017, the donor is not required to disclose the name of the political party while purchasing the electoral bonds. And the political parties are not required to maintain the records of these donors. Now, this is one of the issues with the introduction of electoral bonds, because previously all the donations above rupees 20,000 had to be maintained by the political parties as to where it is coming from and the name and address of the donating company or the corporate. However, now this provision has been done away with, and this affects the cause of transparency in the funding of elections. This is because the names of the company which are donating to particular political parties is not being given out. Now previously, under the Companies Act of 2013, a company had to be at least 3 years old in order to contribute to a political party, and its contribution could not have been more than 7.5% of its average net profit in the 3 preceding years. So this was the provision in the Companies Act before the electoral bonds were introduced. However, with the introduction of electoral bonds and the amendment in the Companies Act 2013, the government has removed the cap of 7.5% on political donations by the company. Secondly, now the companies need not disclose the name of political party to which the company has contributed. So now what is the issue with these amendments and the introduction of electoral bonds and the changes in the Companies Act? Now any company can donate any amount of cash through the electoral bonds and the identity of such company shall not be disclosed. So that is why shell companies can be formed by these companies just for political funding, and this can be a major source of corruption. So the first issue was related to the anonymity and transparency, while the second is related to the shell companies and the source of corruption in political funding. So these are two major issues. The third major issue is related to the foreign contribution or foreign funding of the political parties. Now regarding foreign funding, you should note that previously under the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act, the foreign funding or all the funding from the foreign sources was not allowed to the political parties. However, now with the introduction of electoral bonds and the changes in the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, it has been allowed that the donations can be received from foreign companies which have a majority stake in Indian companies. And this could only be done if the foreign companies were following the FEMA guidelines and which are related to the foreign investment in the sectors in which they operate. So by the changes in the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, now the foreign funding for the political parties is also open. And this can also lead to a corruption and influencing of the policy decisions in India. So the three major issues are related to transparency, corruption and the foreign funding. Now let us look at the submission of the Election Commission of India in the Supreme Court regarding the electoral bonds. Now as we have learned about the various issues related or associated with the electoral bonds, the Election Commission of India has submitted in the Supreme Court that the introduction of electoral bonds and the way in which they have been introduced causes a serious impact on the transparency in political funding. This is because the companies are not required to disclose their names and the names of the political parties to which they are funding. Secondly, by allowing the foreign funding through the purchase of electoral bonds, these kinds of funding invite foreign corporate powers into Indian politics. So this can also lead to interference in the Indian politics. This is because the foreign companies can now invest in the political parties. Further, the Election Commission of India also raised concerns on the two consecutive amendments which were made in the Finance Acts of 2016 and 17. And we have learned that these amendments were related to changes in the Income Tax Act, the Representation of People Act 1951, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 2010, etc. And regarding these amendments, the Election Commission has said that these amendments would pump in black money for political parties through the shell companies. And this will also allow unchecked foreign funding of political parties in India, which could lead to Indian politics being influenced by the foreign companies. The Election Commission has also said that it had warned the Ministry of Law and Justice about the amendments and the adverse impact these could have on the political funding in India. Now this matter is sub judice and the Supreme Court is yet to take a decision or give a verdict on this issue. Now this petition has been filed in the Supreme Court by the Association for Democratic Rights or ADR, and they have raised the issue of unlimited corporate funding and transparency in political. Now this article on page number 7 reads that India can become a sizable player in the electronics. Now electronics sector is one of the important focus areas of the government of India because India wants to improve the production of the electronics sector, which is presently not achieving its potential. Now electronics sector is also important because of one of the important inputs in the electronics sector, and that is the semiconductor. And the global economy is facing shortage of the semiconductors. And that is why in this article it is important for us to understand the present status of electronics manufacturing in India and also few important schemes that have been unveiled by the government of India. And after that, let us try and analyze the issue related to semiconductor shortage and what is the potential and need for semiconductors and what is the government of India doing about it. Now, the electronics industry is one of the fastest growing industries and it accounts for almost 2.3% of India's GDP. And the annual production of electronic goods has increased from $30 billion in 2014 and 15 to $70 billion in 2018 and 19, which is a compounded annual growth rate of about 25%. Further, India has also emerged as the second largest manufacturer of mobile phones after China. And the annual production of mobile phones has increased from $3 billion in 2014 and 15 to $24 billion in 2018 and 19. And the domestic demand of the mobile phones is almost completely met out of the domestic production itself. So this is the current status of the production of electronic goods in India. However, regarding the demand for electronic goods in India, you should note that the annual import of electronic goods has increased to $56 billion due to higher demand in India. However, in the last decade, that is between 2011 to 2019, the import of electronic goods has grown the fastest, and it was negligible at the beginning of 2011, and now its share has increased to almost 3.6%. And China alone accounts for 67% of India's imports. And thus, India has not been able to replicate its success of IT sector in the electronics sector. And we note that India has a huge trade deficit with that of China, and that is why it wants to increase the production of electronics goods in India itself. Now, after looking at the current status of production and also the increasing demand of electronic goods and the increasing imports, let us look at what is the potential for electronics manufacturing in India. So in this regard, India has the potential to replicate China's success and become the global leader in manufacturing of electronic goods. And the increase in production costs of electronic goods in China has made it possible for India to become a major destination of electronic manufacturing and exports. Further, India needs to get integrated into the global value chains by focusing on manufacturing of electronic components such as semiconductors, etc. And in this regard, you might be knowing that in the Union Budget of 2020 and 21, this budget has highlighted the Assemble in India has to be integrated into Make in India. So currently India is importing various parts of the electronic equipments and they are assembling them in India. However, now India wants that its domestic industries start producing those parts themselves in India itself. And also the economic survey has highlighted that this would increase India's export share from current 1.6% to 3.5% by 2025 and up to 6% by 2030. And also it will help in countering one of the biggest problem that India faces, that is the problem of unemployment. And this would create 4 crore well-paid jobs by 2025 and about 8 crore jobs by 2030. So this shows the immense potential of electronics manufacturing in India, and we note that the price of production of electronic goods in China is increasing day by day. And as such, India can emerge as a major competitor to the Chinese electronic products. So after this, let us look at the new schemes that have been launched or the schemes that have been approved by the Union Cabinet in this regard. Now, the first scheme in this regard is the Production Linked Incentive Scheme for large-scale electronics manufacturing. And the main objective of this scheme is to boost the domestic manufacturing and attract large investments in mobile phone manufacturing and specified electronic components, which will include the assembly, testing, marking, packaging units, etc. And in this regard, the Government of India is likely to extend an incentive of 4 to 6% on incremental sales. And these incentives will be provided for goods manufactured in India for a period of 5 years subsequent to the base year, which will be defined by the Government of India itself. Now, the nature of the incentives is presently being discussed by the Government of India. However, the incentives are likely to be in the form of duty credit scrips, which are provided under the Merchandise Exports from India scheme. Now, the duty credit scrips are export-linked incentive provided to the industries, and the value of scrip depends upon the product and the country to which the goods are exported. And these scrips can be used by the exporters to either pay the taxes to the government or sell them in the open market and raise money. So accordingly, such kind of duty credit scripts will also be provided for electronics manufacturing. And this proposed scheme will cost around rupees 41,000 crores. Now, some of the likely benefits of introduction of such a scheme is that it will attract the global multinational companies such as Apple, Samsung to manufacture in India. Also, it will boost the domestic industries and it will help in realizing the vision which was highlighted in the budget, that is from assembling in India to be integrated into Make in India. And it will lead to a creation of 8 lakh direct and indirect jobs. Now, the second scheme is being launched to promote the domestic manufacturing of electronic components in India. And presently we note that India does not have a strong electronic component manufacturing base. And it mainly imports these electronic components from China and assemble those electronic components into finished products. So this scheme for the promotion of manufacturing of electronic components and semiconductors focuses on the domestic manufacturing of electronic components. So the incentives that will be provided under this scheme will be of 25% of the capital expenditure for the manufacturing of goods that constitute the supply chain of electronic product will be provided by the government of India. And this will cater to all the segments of electronics manufacturing such as mobile electronics, consumer electronics, industrial electronics, medical electronics, etc. And the likely benefits are that it will lead to the development of electric component manufacturing ecosystem in our country and will also deepen the electronics value chain. And it will lead to new investments in the electronics sector to the tune of at least rupees 20,000 crore and will help in reducing the dependence on import of the components and will ensure the digital security for India. And the third scheme is the Modified Electronics Manufacturing Clusters or the EMC 2.0. And this is aimed at improving the ecosystem for the manufacturing of electronics or targeted manufacturing clusters for the electronics in India. Now in this regard, earlier the Ministry of Electronics and Information had notified the Electronics Manufacturing Cluster Scheme in 2012. And it aimed at providing support for the creation of world-class infrastructure for attracting investments in the electronic system design and manufacturing sector. Now, this EMC scheme provided grant assistance for setting up of both the greenfield as well as the brownfield projects across the country. And also there is a need for continuation of such a scheme in modified form for strengthening the infrastructure base for the electronics industry in the country. And accordingly, the Modified Electronics Manufacturing Cluster Scheme would support setting up of both the electronic manufacturing clusters and common facility centers. And for this purpose, these electronics manufacturing clusters would be set up in geographically contiguous areas. And the government will focus on the development of basic infrastructure, amenities and other common facilities. And the benefits are that it will lead to the availability of ready infrastructure and plug and play facility for attracting investments in this sector. Further, it will attract new investments and it will also lead to jobs creation in the manufacturing of electronics. And it will boost the revenue in the form of taxes which will be paid by such manufacturing units. Now we need to first understand that electronics industry is world's largest and the fastest growing industry. And it has application in almost all the sectors of the economy, including the automobile industry, medical equipments, or mobile technology or internet related technology. Everywhere the electronics industry is playing a key role. And a key component in the electronic industry is the semiconductors. So the semiconductors are a key enabler in the advancement of the electronics industry, and they will play an even greater role with the introduction of new technologies such as Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, 5G technology, as well as smart cars, smart factories, etc. Now in this context, even when we realize that the electronics industry is likely to grow at a larger pace and will have a crucial role in various sectors, the crucial input in the electronics sector, that is semiconductor, has seen a severe shortage during the COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, the COVID-19 pandemic had shut down the factories that focus on manufacturing of these semiconductor chips specifically. Another issue that is visible in the semiconductor fabrication is that even though it has utility in almost all the sectors, the microchips are manufactured only in few countries including Taiwan as well as China. And that is why there has been severe shortage of the microchips across the globe. Further, there has been an increase in the demand of the semiconductor chips because of its increasing utility now. Now, the need for technology for working from home, fluctuations in automotive sector, and deployment of 5G infrastructure, etc., have given a push for increasing use of semiconductor microchips. And also, there has been supply chain disruptions due to closing of shipping lines as well as non-availability of containers due to the issues faced by the supply chains during the COVID-19 pandemic. And all these factors have combinedly led to a global shortage of the semiconductor microchips. Further, India, which is focusing on increasing the share of the electronics industry in its economy, is also facing the issue of accessing these semiconductor fabricated microchips for the production in the electronics sector. And some of the challenges that are faced in development of the semiconductor fabrication in India is that the semiconductor manufacturing is a complex and research intensive sector. Further, this industry is also capital intensive in nature, and that is why both these stand as a key issue in the creation or development of semiconductor manufacturing in India. Also, rapid changes in technology are also witnessed in the semiconductor microchip production. And that is why the players in the industry need to keep pace with the rapidly changing technology to be relevant in the global electronics industry or become an important player in the semiconductor production. Further, regarding the electronic products that are produced in India, the semiconductors play a crucial part as an input in these electronics production. So after looking at the challenges in the development of semiconductor fabrication or production of semiconductor microchips in India, let us look at why it becomes crucial for India to produce these semiconductor microchips. So in the recent years, electronics manufacturing has substantially increased in India, and the National Policy of Electronics 2019 aims to develop India as a global hub for electronic system design and manufacturing, and it also aims at creating an enabling environment for industry to compete globally. In this regard, the government has already started focusing on the development of the semiconductor microchips in India, and that is why the cabinet has taken this decision of allotting 76,000 crores for microchips development. However, besides allocation of such hefty amount, there are certain steps that the government needs to take care of. So in this regard, the government needs to incentivize and attract foreign investment in setting up the semiconductor fabrication in India. Further, we are aware that ease of doing business is one of the hurdles in manufacturing in India, and that is why the government also needs to facilitate ease of doing business for microchips manufacturing. The focus also has to be on research and development in the semiconductor design and fabrication technologies. Also, the government needs to mandate some of the public sector firms for fabrication of these microchips in India. So these are some steps besides the allocation of money that the government has allocated that the government can take to further boost the semiconductor manufacturing in India. With this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 1 is related to the Collegium system, and Supreme Court has agreed to list a plea for Collegium system's review. Now, Collegium system is a very important topic for us from the preliminary examination perspective in the Indian polity, and it has been covered in detail in one of the previous DNS videos. So we will be revising from that video various aspects of the Collegium system and the critical analysis of this existing Collegium system.
Now, from the perspective of UPSC examination, the Collegium system is not only important in the prelim examination, it is also important under the General Studies paper 2, in which UPSC can ask questions with respect to the structure, organization and the functioning of judiciary, and Collegium is an important part of the functioning and structure of judicial system. So today we are going to talk about the important constitutional articles with reference to the Supreme Court as well as the Collegium system. We will look into the history of Collegium system, how it has evolved, as well as what are the basic tenets. And lastly, we will try to analyze the functioning of Collegium system. Do India need such kind of system or not? Through the merits and the demerits. After the entire discussion, you will be in a position to answer this prelims related question and also able to understand how the entire Collegium functions. Before that, do remember that Collegium system is common for High Court and Supreme Court together. There is no collegium system separate for the high courts or for the lower judiciary. The lower judiciary appointments are not based on the collegium system headed by the Chief Justice of India. So let's start the discussion. These are the important articles which are given in the Indian Constitution and are associated with the appointment of the Supreme Court judges. Well, Article 124(2) says that every judge of a Supreme Court shall be appointed by the President by warrant under his hand and seal. Article 124(2)(a), which is a sub-part of the above article, says that a judge may, by writing under his hand, addressed to the President, resign his office. So, the resignation letter should go to the President directly without any executive or the judicial interference. When it comes to the Article 124(4), it talks about the removal. It says that a judge of a Supreme Court shall not be removed from his or her office except by the order of the President. So here also the role of the President is very important. But this order is not subjected to the personal will of a President. This order should be passed by both the houses of the Parliament, supported by a majority of the total membership of that house, and by the majority of not less than 2/3 of the members of that house present and voting. So if you are reading about the Indian polity through M. Lakshmikant book, you must have gone through different kinds of majorities which are required to pass a particular resolution. In this case, in order to pass an order through the President, Parliament have to come together. At each house of the Parliament, it is not a matter of joint sitting. Each house should pass this separately with the majority, which means 50% of the strength plus 1, along with not less than 2/3 of the members who are present and voting. So this is very important thing which you need to remember for your prelims examination. This majority then will help to pass an order, which order will go to a particular judge through the President, and that judge will be liable to leave the position. Article 124(6) talks about oath and affirmation of a particular judge in a Supreme Court. It says that a person who is appointed as a judge of the Supreme Court will take an oath and affirmation before the President or any other person who is appointed by the President. And we know that these oaths and affirmations are given in the 3rd schedule of Indian Constitution. So, irrespective of how a person is appointed, resignation, removal, or even the oath, everywhere you will find the mention of a single person who is the President of India. But as we know, the executive power, the real executive power of the President lies with the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. So in this case also, will, ideas, advice, everything comes from the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. President is acting as an implementing authority in this case also. And lastly, we have Article 124(7), which puts restrictions on the practice by a particular judge after the retirement. This article says that a person who has already held an office of judge in the Supreme Court will not be allowed to plead or act in any court or even before any authority within the territory of India. Are you getting this point? See, this article has actually provided an ample space for a person to act or plead in the international level. They are restricted at the national, but they are not restricted at the international level. Now, I want this from you. Who was the person who was appointed as a judge at the international level after being a judge in the Indian Supreme Court? If you know the answer, please comment in the comment box. Now we come to the point that what is a collegium? I believe all of you must have read it previously. If not, then go through this discussion in a much detail. Well, Collegium system is one where the CJI and a forum of 4 senior most judges. Well, this can differ from country to country, and it is not important that every country should have a collegium. However, it is important for India. So this system has now 1 + 4 judges of the Supreme Court who recommend appointment and transfer. See, both appointment and transfer are part of the collegium activity of the higher judiciary, Now, what do we have learned from this definition? The first one, that there are 5 members. The second one, all of them are from Supreme Court. The third one, that they only recommend, they do not take the final decision. The fourth one, that they are looking for appointment as well as transfer for the judges. And the fifth one, that they are looking for higher judiciary only, which means they can take decisions on High Court as well as Supreme Court. So we do not have a collegium system at the High Court level. So this is what we have learned so far. Now, how collegium system came into existence? Well, it is based on the 3 important Supreme Court judgments which were made previously, and they are known as judges cases. They are 3 in number. In first case, the Supreme Court has clearly said that opinion of the Chief Justice of India and the Chief Justice of the respective High Courts were merely consultative. It means they are not final, and the power of appointment resides solemnly and exclusively with the central government. Well, in simple terms, it means that this case has proved that Supreme Court is not the final authority to decide on the appointments and give enormous power to the central government to override the opinion given by the CGI. However, under second judge's case, Supreme Court gave a different judgment. Well, this case is famously known as Supreme Court Advocates on Record Association versus Union of India 1993. Under this case, Supreme Court has clearly emphasized that government does not enjoy primacy or absolute discretion in the matter of appointment of Supreme Court judges. Hence, what they should do? They should look for participatory consultative process, and said that the power of the executive should be just to go for providing checks and balances and not practice in absolute terms. Well, it simply means that the absolute power which was given to the executive under the first judge's case was now denied. However, still there was a set of confusion that how this consultation should be made possible. What should be the ideal criteria? What should be the procedure to go for collegium type of system? Well, this problem came to an end under third judge's case, which is also an important precedence when it comes to the presidential reference to the Supreme Court. Well, under Article 143 of the Indian Constitution, President can refer a particular matter for the advisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. And because of this reference, today we are having the collegium system. So, as per this case and the judgment, Chief Justice of India shall consult 4 senior most judges of the Supreme Court. Now we come to that number of 1 plus 4. And this 1 plus 4 grouping is actually the current status of the collegium. We know that National Judicial Appointment Commission was created in order to replace the collegium system. However, this was struck down by the Supreme Court, saying that it goes against the independence of the judiciary and balance of power. However, under this case, Supreme Court had an opinion that all the members of the collegium regarding their recommendation shall put it in the writing. It means that whatever they recommend for the appointment of a particular judge should be given in a writing form. It should not be oral. Secondly, they should follow the majority rule. Now, what does it mean? It means that if the majority of the collegium is against the appointment of a particular person, let's say 3 out of 5 members say that a particular person is not eligible to be a judge in the Supreme Court, then that person will cease to be a member in the Supreme Court. However, we have an exemption in this. A High Court judge of outstanding merit can be appointed as a Supreme Court judge regardless of his standing in the seniority list. See, the most important issue regarding the collegium system is what amounts to meritorious eligibility. And the second important list is how to come up with an important, non-partial and ethical seniority list. If these 2 issues are resolved, collegium system can become more accurate and trustworthy. Now, given the evolution of the collegium system in India, now let us also look into what are the pros and cons of the collegium system in India. The first important merit of the collegium system is that it ensures the independence of the judiciary, because under this system, the executive control or the executive initiative comes only at the later stage or at the last stage of the appointment. So, President is not consulted while going through the merits of a particular candidate. Prime Minister or the Council of Ministers are not at all involved while listing down the important members to be appointed to the Supreme Court. Hence, it ensures the independence of the judiciary as mentioned under Article 50. As we have discussed previously, the recommendations and the views are taken in the writing format. So a person cannot deny that he or she has recommended or not recommended to a particular person in the future. So the possibility of denial in the course of appointment is ruled out. The prevalence of the majority opinion also favors that it is based on a democratic process. If more number of collegium members are against a particular person, he or she ceases to be appointed to a judge in the Supreme Court. Reservation given by even two members or the two judges in the collegium system is also taken very seriously. It means that if two members in the collegium says that a particular person is not eligible or is less eligible than the other candidate, that person is also ceased to be a member in the Supreme Court. And lastly, it allows talented lawyers from the Bar Association to be appointed as a judge. Well, this is something which is very good. It actually removes the issue of uncle judges, where the member of the judiciary who know each other favors each other. So we have that kind of issue in the lower judiciary, but appointment of the lawyers to the Supreme Court and the High Court has reduced this issue of uncle judges to a considerable level. Now let us come into the demerits of the collegium system. The first one is the lack of transparency and accountability. As we have discussed previously, because of the ambiguity in what amounts to the seniority level and what amounts to the merit of a particular person, there lies an element of lack of transparency and accountability. Despite giving the recommendation in the written format, a particular member of a collegium is not accountable to why and how they have appointed a particular person or recommended a particular person. There is no authority in India that can question that why a particular judge was appointed as a Supreme Court judge. Secondly, we have lack of consensus among the members of the collegium. The point is, let's say there are 4 members who are saying that a particular person is eligible. However, Chief Justice of India is not finding it to be eligible. There might also be a case where one person knows the background of the eligible candidate to be in the dark format. However, the other judges, that is 3 or maybe even the Supreme Court Chief Justice, say that a person is eligible. What is the solution to this kind of problem? It is yet to be answered. There have been some allegations regarding the nepotism practice in the Supreme Court, which says that number of judges who have been appointed had one or the other linkages with the past political parties or the current political parties, which actually brings down the quality of judgment in the future. We also have politicization of the judiciary, where the judges who have been appointed by the collegium, or in fact the members of the collegium, have been given political patronage in the future. We also have absence of permanent commission. Law Commission, under its recommendation of 121st report, has proposed to set up a National Judicial Service Commission to appoint judges. In fact, National Commission for the Review of Working of the Indian Constitution in 2002 report has also highlighted the need for National Judicial Commission for the purpose of appointing members to the higher judiciary. But both these recommendations were sidelined. Judiciary earlier has also declared NJAC Act, that is National Judicial Appointment Commission Act, and its particular constitutional amendment as unconstitutional. Many political scientists have called this as an overreach by the judiciary, who were not open to go for compromising situation and balance of power. Because declaring NJAC as unconstitutional has also raised fingers on the working of the judiciary, which is supporting a mechanism where judges are appointed by the judges without any role of the executive and in fact the legislation. Now, given this discussion and the analysis of the NJAC, we also come to the conclusion with this important prelims question. So read this question carefully and answer in the comment box. Let us now move to the next article for the day.